Welcome back, everyone. In today's shocking episode, we dive into the most explosive courtroom revelation in Pawn Stars history. Frank Fritz's killer, Mike Wolfe, has dropped a bombshell in court, unveiling undeniable proof that Rick Harrison was involved in a murder. This jaw-dropping twist is one you won't want to miss. Get ready as we uncover the secrets, the lies, and the scandalous truths behind the Pawn Stars empire. You won't believe what you're about to hear. In the recent trial, Mike Wolfe, the killer of Frank Fritz, shocked the courtroom by presenting undeniable proof that Rick Harrison was involved in a murder. Do you think this truth will surprise you as much as it did those in the courtroom? Leave a comment with a 1 if you believe Rick is involved or a 0 if you think it's all just a made-up story. Hit that like button if you can't wait to uncover the truth behind this scandal, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any more shocking updates. This afternoon, news of the death of Frank Fritz, a native of Iowa and one of America's most famous treasure hunters, has shocked many. Frank Fritz, a familiar face in the treasure hunting world, traveled across the United States searching for forgotten treasures. However, his sudden death from an unexpected stroke has raised questions in the media, but when toxicology reports were released showing traces of poison in his body, the FBI got involved and everything began to unfold. Mike Wolfe, Frank Fritz's close partner for over a decade, was deeply saddened when he learned of his friend's passing. In an emotional statement to the media, Mike cried and remembered Frank. However, as the case began to take unexpected turns, Mike Wolfe found himself facing accusations of murder. At this point, questions arose about a bigger name connected to the case, Rick Harrison, the so-called king of the adult film industry stars. Why was Rick dragged into this? Could it be a carefully orchestrated conspiracy to eliminate Frank and take control of the hundreds of millions of dollars television empire they had built? When Frank Fritz's death was announced in early 2021, the initial cause was attributed to complications from a stroke. According to records from the Iowa State Hospital, where Frank was last admitted, he had collapsed after experiencing sudden symptoms such as disorientation, shortness of breath, and irregular heartbeat. These signs seemed consistent with a stroke, especially for someone with a history of obesity, high blood pressure, and alcohol addiction like Frank. However, the reaction from family and friends raised suspicions. Frank's cousin, Jeff Fritz, insisted that Frank had made significant health improvements in the second half of 2020, and no one in the family believed he would suddenly pass away like that. The night before Frank was admitted to the hospital, he had dinner with Mike Wolfe and some old friends. A longtime friend at the gathering, Susan T., shared that Frank appeared tired and complained of dizziness and nausea, but insisted on going home alone. These small details, however, became the key to a new direction in the investigation. About 10 days after Frank's death, the Iowa State Forensic Lab released the toxicology report, and everything started to come to light. The toxicology report from the lab revealed unusually high levels of benzodiazepines and central nervous system depressants in Frank's blood and stomach, nearly 10 times the standard treatment dose. These substances were not present in any of Frank's prescriptions and were completely inconsistent with a stroke diagnosis. This indicated that Frank's death was not a natural accident, but a deliberate poisoning. When the report was handed over to the FBI, a special task force was set up to collaborate with local law enforcement agencies. As the interrogations began, Mike Wolfe was one of the first people to be investigated. It was known that Mike had witnessed the change in Frank's health before he was hospitalized. So, is Mike Wolfe really the culprit? Or is he simply caught in a more complex conspiracy that he was unaware of? The answer to this case may still shock many as the truth continues to unfold. Frank Fritz, the well-known treasure hunter, died under suspicious circumstances, and details emerging after his death began to unravel a major mystery. Investigators quickly discovered anomalies during the search of his home in Davenport, Iowa. In Frank's personal cabinet, they found several bottles of medication with labels that had been tampered with or altered. Some of these bottles contained traces of toxins identical to those found in Frank's body. Even more intriguing, forensic analysis confirmed Mike Wolfe's fingerprints on 2 of these bottles. During questioning, Mike Wolfe, Frank's longtime companion, stated that he had helped Frank organize his medication after a back injury. However, the details regarding the location, time, and types of medication didn't match his statements. This was when initial suspicions turned into quiet but undeniable accusations. But that wasn't all. A surveillance video from the neighborhood where Frank lived showed Mike entering Frank's house the night before the incident, a detail that was never mentioned in his initial testimony. Additionally, a voicemail from Frank to a close friend revealed that Mike had been acting strangely lately. Frank recorded a 1-minute and 40-second message in which he expressed that Mike had been pressuring him to leave the show and hand over full production control. The concerns about Mike's actions seemed to have evolved into a genuine threat in Frank's eyes. From being a close friend for nearly 15 years, Mike Wolfe suddenly became the center of a murder conspiracy. As the case took a new turn, Mike Wolfe was officially summoned to testify before the grand jury. This was when he changed his testimony. While denying any involvement in Frank's death, Mike claimed that the real person behind it all was none other than Rick Harrison, the host of Pawn Stars. Rick Harrison, a well-known figure on the World of Antique Auctions program on the History Channel, had a complex business relationship with both Mike and Frank. Although he had never appeared publicly with them, Rick had financially supported joint ventures between their branches, helping build a valuable brand. However, Frank's ongoing presence seemed to be threatening the profit chain that Rick and his partners had built. With physical evidence and a clear motive, Frank Fritz's death was no longer just a medical accident. It had turned into a full-blown criminal case, complete with motive, method, and undeniable evidence. While Frank's family continues to fight to restore his reputation, the public now views the familiar faces on television with a sense of suspicion. This case not only shattered the trust of fans, but also exposed a ruthless and conspiratorial world lurking behind the glitz and glamour of reality TV shows. With physical evidence and a clear motive, Frank Fritz's death was no longer just a medical accident. It had turned into a full-blown criminal case, complete with motive, method, and undeniable evidence. While Frank's family continues to fight to restore his reputation, the public now views the familiar faces on television with a sense of suspicion. This case not only shattered the trust of fans, but also exposed a ruthless and conspiratorial world lurking behind the glitz and glamour of reality TV shows. Mike Wolfe began to rise to prominence around 2018, when Frank Fritz's health started to seriously decline due to complications from Crohn's disease and his alcohol addiction. Frank became increasingly absent from filming, forcing Mike to take on more work on screen. As production pressures mounted, the scrutiny over their salaries and roles became tense. According to some sources, Mike began discussing with producers about restructuring the show, including the idea of gradually phasing out Frank to transition into a solo host format. Behind-the-scenes tensions grew, and many staff members reported that Mike had become distant with Frank, communicating less and often blaming him when viewership numbers dropped. Everything continued quietly until Frank suddenly left the show in 2020 without any official explanation. Mike publicly expressed his sadness and shared emotional posts, but Frank's silence led many to question what had really happened. In a brief interview after leaving, Frank simply said, "I didn't leave the show because I wanted to." Looking back, this statement now seems like a forewarning of the events that were to come. After Frank's death, Mike Wolfe's behavior didn't reflect that of a grieving friend. Just a few days after the funeral, Mike returned to the production office to discuss continuing the show. An anonymous employee told the FBI, "Mike didn't cry. He just wanted to know if we had a script for the new season and if the audience would accept a format without Frank." Financial decisions were made quickly, from renegotiating image rights related to Frank to revising advertising contracts. All of this indicated that Mike was preparing for a future without his longtime companion. However, the most suspicious element was the digital traces that the FBI gathered from Mike Wolfe's personal phone and computer. In a message sent to a producer just 48 hours before Frank was hospitalized, Mike wrote, "It's time for me to handle things. Frank has done his part. Now it's my turn to take over." While these words could be interpreted as self-motivation, they hinted at prior planning, and it seemed like we were witnessing a scheme that had been prepared for some time. In addition to the messages through phone and email, another email Mike sent to a Canadian TV distributor titled New Project American Pickers 2.0 included a production plan for the new season without Frank Fritz. This occurred just 10 days before Frank's death. The FBI considered these documents as evidence that Mike had been planning to seize control of the American Pickers franchise. However, what turned Mike from a witness into the main suspect was the discovery of his fingerprints on 2 bottles of poison that killed Frank. During his second interrogation, Mike's tone shifted. He no longer maintained his complete innocence and began hinting at external pressure and a more powerful figure behind the situation. After nearly 6 hours of questioning, Mike finally revealed a name that no one had expected: Rick Harrison. Mike stated that Rick had approached him privately on several occasions at reality TV events, proposing a plan to remove Frank from the show in order to restructure the partnership between American Pickers and adult film stars. An email from Rick to Mike read, "Mike, if you want to keep your lead position, don't let Frank's weaknesses bring down the empire you've built. Act now. I've got your back." These words not only changed Mike's life, but also exposed a complex conspiracy behind Frank's death. Since Mike Wolfe named Rick Harrison in his interrogation, Frank Fritz's case has taken a dramatic turn. Previously, Mike Wolfe was considered the prime suspect in Frank's death, but now there's growing suspicion that a larger conspiracy is at play, with Rick Harrison potentially behind it all. Some believe Mike is attempting to deflect attention from himself, but criminal analysts suggest this could be a sign of a mastermind pulling the strings. This theory is further supported when considering the financial gains Rick Harrison could reap if Mike Wolfe became the sole controller of American Pickers through licensing deals and subsidiaries related to merchandise, as well as the expansion of antique store chains. Legally, the case has put Mike Wolfe in a difficult position. If he truly poisoned Frank, the physical evidence would implicate him. However, if Mike was merely a pawn in the hands of another mastermind, the motive behind Frank's death becomes much more complex. As a result, the FBI has expanded its investigation to include financial records, business partnerships, and communication logs between Mike Wolfe and Rick Harrison. From a beloved TV personality, Mike Wolfe is now viewed in an entirely different light, as someone pushed into a power game where eliminating Frank Fritz was a strategic move. With the latest revelations, Rick Harrison's role has become increasingly suspicious. While he was previously seen as an outsider in the case, evidence now shows that he is far from innocent. Rick Harrison has had a close business relationship with Mike Wolfe since 2015, when they collaborated on image licensing projects for souvenir shops and classic merchandise, helping to build the American Pickers brand. These partnerships were never made public, and they operated quietly through private investment funds and shell companies. This means Rick had invested in American Pickers subsidiaries, and Frank Fritz's continued involvement holding a share of ownership prevented Rick from having full control over these investments. After Mike Wolfe's statement, the FBI reviewed emails, text messages, and financial transactions between Rick and Mike from the 18 months leading up to Frank's death. A series of emails from December 2020, just 4 weeks before Frank was hospitalized, particularly caught attention. In one of them, Rick wrote, "Frank is slowing everything down. Time won't wait, Mike. Without you at the wheel, everything will fall apart. I'm ready. When you're ready to act, I'll back you up fully." These messages were not only vague, but also implied psychological manipulation, especially when they appeared at the exact moment Frank's health was deteriorating and he was gradually stepping back from public appearances. Even more concerning was a series of money transfers from Rick's Harrison Holdings Company to an account linked to Wolfe Media, the company that owns American Pickers. While these transfers were not illegal on paper, they clearly had a strategic nature, with notes like strategic branding consultation supporting long-term restructuring. Although these payments didn't directly prove criminal activity, they implied that Rick would financially benefit if Frank Fritz was no longer part of the franchise. With the evidence at hand, it's clear that Rick Harrison was not just a television star, but also someone with significant influence over major financial decisions. Was Rick truly the mastermind behind this case? If so, his motive for eliminating Frank Fritz went beyond personal rivalry. It was a financial strategy, where power and profit could cloud the judgment of even longtime friends. Frank's death is no longer just a typical criminal case. It has now evolved into a complex story about power, money, and hidden conspiracies. Rick Harrison's complete silence following Frank Fritz's death has raised deep suspicions. While Rick had previously made frequent public appearances with Frank at trade events, after Frank's passing, Rick issued only a brief statement through his lawyer, denying any involvement in Frank's death and claiming that all accusations were unfounded. However, FBI records contradict Rick's calm exterior. Within 24 hours of Frank's death, Rick made 5 calls to Mike Wolfe. This stands in stark contrast to his public silence, with no condolences or contact with fans. only calls and encrypted messages. If you're shocked by Rick Harrison's silence and the conflicting evidence, don't forget to share this video with your friends and leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about the secrets that are slowly being uncovered? Will Rick continue to stay silent, or will the truth finally come to light? Hit that like button if you want to keep following this story, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for the latest updates. Robert Harris, Rick's former business assistant, came forward as a witness in the case. In his 3-hour testimony, he revealed that Rick had openly discussed buying a stake in American Pickers if Frank were to leave. Although Rick did not specify how Frank would leave, Robert testified that the discussion was scheduled for the first quarter of 2021, just before Frank's death. FBI analysts believe this statement indicates a premeditated business strategy, suggesting that a plan to eliminate Frank may have been in place before his death. An internal email from Rick to the legal board on January 6, 2021, just 5 days before Frank experienced the medical incident leading to his death, has also drawn attention. In the email, Rick inquired about options to access the content rights of American Pickers in the event a partner became incapacitated. This legal language is typically used in situations involving death or incapacity. The FBI views these documents as evidence, suggesting that Rick had a plan in place in case Frank could no longer participate in the show. In terms of motive, Rick Harrison has lost a lot in recent years. The viewership of Pawn Stars has declined since 2018, and the brand collaboration between American Pickers and Pawn Stars hasn't delivered the expected benefits. A brand alliance, especially one with Mike Wolfe, would allow Rick to reach a broader audience and optimize business licensing, expanding his classic reality TV empire. However, Frank Fritz, who valued authenticity and opposed excessive commercialization, was the biggest obstacle for Rick. During this time, Rick also faced significant financial pressure. A leaked internal financial report from his company revealed over $1 billion in long-term debt related to the failed expansion of Pawn Plaza, a retail complex in Las Vegas. Strengthening his relationship with Wolfe Media was Rick's way of restoring his financial standing and brand. According to the testimony of a consulting expert in the case file, these details begin to paint a clearer picture of Rick Harrison's plan. The FBI approached Frank Fritz's case from several angles. One of the most significant discoveries was the forensic digital scan of the communication devices and financial accounts of Mike Wolfe and Rick Harrison. Security cameras from Frank's neighborhood confirmed that Mike Wolfe visited Frank's house 3 times in the final week of his life, including the last dinner they shared. However, these visits were not recorded in the official filming schedule for American Pickers, indicating they were unplanned and occurred in the evening. Notably, during the final visit, Mike stayed for over 1 hour and 20 minutes, a duration that coincides with when Frank began showing symptoms of poisoning. The FBI also collected GPS data from Mike Wolfe's vehicle, confirming that his trips to and from Frank's house perfectly aligned with the footage from the security cameras. Additionally, a portion of deleted text messages from Mike Wolfe's personal phone was recovered, revealing an important exchange with Rick Harrison. One message from Rick read, "You're too close to turn back now, Mike. Stay calm. Finish clean so you can start over." This message was time-stamped at 10:37 p.m., just hours before Frank was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Notably, the FBI also obtained an audio recording automatically saved on Frank Fritz's phone, in which he shared with a relative, "I don't feel safe around Mike anymore. He said strange things, like wanting me to disappear. Rick is up to something too. I don't know who I can trust." This is the first direct evidence showing that Frank felt threatened and suspected betrayal from both Mike and Rick. In addition to the digital evidence, the FBI also investigated the financial transactions of both Mike Wolfe and Rick Harrison. They uncovered several suspicious money transfers, including a $75,000 transfer from Rick Harrison Holdings to a company named MW Creative Ventures LLC, listed as a television product development fund. However, forensic financial analysts confirmed that this was not a typical investment, and the transfer occurred just 5 days before Frank's death. In terms of financial motive, the FBI found signs of instability in Mike Wolfe's financial records. Several failed investments and mounting debt had pushed him to the brink of bankruptcy by the end of 2020. Gaining full control of American Pickers would allow Mike to restructure his finances, secure commercial licensing deals, and gain exclusive control in negotiations with the History Channel. At the same time, Rick Harrison was also facing significant financial pressure. A report from an independent auditing firm revealed that Rick was burdened with long-term debt from failed real estate projects and inefficient business models in Las Vegas. Since the FBI began investigating Frank Fritz's death, a massive amount of evidence has been presented to the jury, making the case one of the most notable criminal investigations in the history of reality television. The evidence includes fingerprints, poison, digital records, text messages, emails, GPS logs, and the financial motives of the suspects. A former FBI agent appeared on 60 Minutes, emphasizing that this case is not just an ordinary financial fraud, but could potentially turn into a murder case as the severity of the crime reaches new heights, where ethics and humanity are cast aside. While the public still awaits the final verdict, this case has changed the way Americans view television stars. Mike Wolfe, the founder and face of American Pickers, is no longer the cheerful antiques hunter roaming rural roads, and Rick Harrison, once known as the trustworthy pawnshop owner, is no longer seen as reliable. Both are now under legal scrutiny, facing the question of whether greed, fame, and the fear of losing power could drive someone to murder. In June 2021, the federal courthouse in Des Moines, Iowa, became the center of national attention. The trial of Mike Wolfe for first-degree murder in the death of his longtime partner Frank Fritz not only drew interest due to the seriousness of the case, but also because of Mike Wolfe's shocking statement in court. Mike claimed that Rick Harrison was not just involved in the case, but was the mastermind behind this tragedy. Throughout the trial, Mike Wolfe's defense team, a major law firm from Chicago, built a strategy to deny all direct charges against Mike and shifted the focus onto Rick Harrison as the puppeteer behind the scenes. Mike's lead attorney stated in the opening remarks, "My client was manipulated. He did not kill his friend, but he was lured and cornered by a man named Rick Harrison, the true mastermind behind this tragedy." While prosecutors continued to assert that Mike had motive and direct connections to the evidence, the case grew more complicated as Rick Harrison was dragged into the story. The trial lasted for weeks, with dozens of witnesses and forensic experts participating. However, the real turning point came in the third week, when Mike Wolfe chose to represent himself, a rare move in a first-degree murder case. Dressed in a simple gray suit, with a trembling voice, Mike recounted his decades-long friendship with Frank, their travels, arguments, and the difficult times when Frank began to unravel. "I never thought I'd be sitting here," Mike said, "but I can't stay silent when I know who the real puppet master is." The defense then presented a series of previously undisclosed emails and encrypted messages. One email from Rick Harrison to Mike, sent just 48 hours after the private meeting in Las Vegas, read, "If you want to move forward, you must be willing to sacrifice. We can't carry that rotten legacy anymore." These words sent shockwaves through the courtroom, further strengthening the theory of a calculated conspiracy orchestrated by Rick Harrison. These details not only heightened the gravity of the case, but also raised major questions about Rick's involvement and the true motive behind Frank Fritz's death. In the trial of Mike Wolfe for the death of Frank Fritz, a series of crucial pieces of evidence were revealed, changing the direction of the case. Encrypted messages from the phones of Mike and Rick Harrison were recovered by the FBI, in which Rick mentioned ensuring Frank is out of the picture, clarifying his involvement in the case. Rick's lawyers attempted to dismiss these messages, claiming they were taken out of context, but the FBI's digital forensic examination confirmed their authenticity. These pieces of evidence led to a major turning point in the case. A recording of a phone call between Mike Wolfe and Rick Harrison, made 3 days after Frank's death, was released during the trial. In the call, Rick's cold voice stated, "This will all blow over soon. The press will move on, the audience will adapt. What's important now is that you seize the opportunity." These words not only heightened suspicions, but also suggested that Rick had a premeditated plan in place. The defense also presented a draft licensing agreement for American Pickers that Rick had prepared, which excluded Frank's name from the ownership structure. Mike admitted that Rick had pressured him to sign it, warning that if he didn't, he would lose everything. However, prosecutors were not quick to let Mike off the hook. They presented forensic evidence, including Mike's fingerprints on the bottles of poison used to poison Frank, which Mike couldn't clearly explain. However, the defense introduced a new argument, claiming that Rick was the one who supplied the bottles of poison disguised as supplements through a third-party courier, and that Mike had only unintentionally been involved in the matter, not as the poisoner. They even presented a copy of a pharmaceutical order from a distributor in Nevada, with the payment traceable to a subsidiary of Harrison Holdings. However, the FBI had not yet officially charged Rick, but the pressure was mounting as he was pulled into the heart of the case as the alleged mastermind. Tensions escalated further when witness Susan Thompson, who had dined with Frank and Mike during their final dinner, took the stand. She revealed that Rick had video called Mike throughout the evening, and during the call, Rick said, "Don't forget why you're doing this. Frank is the past. The future is yours." This statement was the final nail in the coffin of Rick Harrison's public image. The weeks-long trial not only shed light on a murder, but also exposed the collapse of a reality TV system once regarded as authentic and trustworthy. From a lighthearted and humorous show, American Pickers became a symbol of the manipulation of financial power and ruthlessness within the television industry. This case triggered a massive trust crisis in reality TV as beloved and admired personalities suddenly became suspects in a murder conspiracy. The revelations of Mike and Rick's involvement not only shocked the public, but also ignited a debate about ethics and responsibility within the media industry. Frank Fritz became a victim of the very attention he helped create. As the show reached its peak success, Frank's health began to decline. However, instead of receiving care and sympathy, he was seen as a financial and strategic burden. His long-standing relationship with Mike Wolfe, his co-host, gradually transformed into one filled with suspicion and conflict. Rick Harrison, an outside figure, emerged as the puppeteer behind the real-life drama of the show's participants. There is no doubt anymore. Reality TV is no longer truly real. Behind the smiles, jokes, and banter, scripted deals and ruthless branding strategies were at play. Frank was not the first to be pushed out of a show due to commercial inconveniences, but he may be the first to lose his life as a direct consequence of being eliminated. The scandal has forced the public to ask urgent questions about networks and production companies, particularly the History Channel, which oversaw both American Pickers and Pawn Stars. Why were figures like Rick and Mike allowed to have near-total control over the content and merchandise of the shows? Why was there no independent oversight system to detect suspicious financial relationships? And how was someone clearly in poor health like Frank allowed to continue appearing on screen despite clear signs of his declining health? As the truth gradually came to light, the public realized that American Pickers and other reality TV shows were not what they had believed. Mike Wolfe was no longer the cheerful antiques hunter roaming rural roads, and Rick Harrison was no longer the humorous pawnshop owner. The signs of tension in Frank's final appearances on American Pickers were not immediately recognized by the audience. Mike's strained expressions, the awkward conversations, and the emotional distance between the two longtime friends revealed that things were no longer the same. However, the audience was so invested in the show and so entertained that they failed to see the truth until the case was uncovered. This case is not just a murder. It has exposed the collapse of a television system once regarded as authentic and trustworthy. Reality TV has created a world where fame and profit can blur the lines of ethics and humanity. Now, with such a major criminal case at hand, the industry faces a crucial question. Where are the limits, and who decides where those boundaries are drawn? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates on this shocking case. No matter how deep the truth is buried, it will always find a way to surface.